So let's just bring all of these up. And again, we'll clean these up with gates in a little while. Okay, that's a pretty good mix that we can deal with. Now, depending on whatever mixer you have, you might be able to have DCA groups. Bring some of those down there. It'll be different on what particular mixer you have. In this particular mixer, all we need to do is hit the DCA here and select that, and then we'll select all of our drums. And now we can control that entire subgroup or that DCA group by one fader. This becomes a really great way just to be able to blend if you just want to pump your drums, you know, in the chorus and bring them down in the verses and things like that. You can do that through DCAs, you can do that through subgroups if you like. The benefit of going through DCAs is that it's kind of a remote control of all of these faders. It's just like pulling these down with the same relative mix between them. So instead of grabbing all of these and doing that, you can just assign them all to one DCA and you can ride the drums there. Now, this being a DCA, which is a remote control of that, you only need to use one. If you are using subgroups, you'd need to, as we saw a little while ago in the analog mixer, if you are using subgroups and you want to preserve all this this panning that we did, then you'd need to use a pair of subgroups. So if you have DCAs, use them. They're a lot better way. Just a one fader allows you to write all of that. Of course, you can do that with background vocals. You could write all your keys, all your guitars, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, let's move on to our guitars. We'll start off with our bass guitar here. I think I have a clean guitar here. All of these will be straight up the middle. Actually, these two could kind of play off each other. So maybe this guy goes out the left a little bit. This guy goes a little bit out of the right. Now this one here is a stereo guitar. And so we do want to bend that. That's right. That's that grunge right there. So then what's this one? Okay, this has a kind of a guitar riff. We're going to add some echoes to this guitar riff in a moment. Let's move on to our second layer, which is a guitar lead. I don't think that's in this part of the song, so we'll come back to that. Here's our acoustic. Again, we'll probably keep them up the middle in terms of panning. So let's see how that all sounds with our drums. Cool, so let's move over to our keyboards. Okay, we have our piano here, which is a stereo piano. We definitely want to pan that out left and to the right. And a synth pad. Another reason for using DCAs, if you're not on that particular layer, it's just a nice way to bring up things without having to switch layers all the time. Okay, now we have some vocals.
In us, let your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Okay, so we've basically got a basic mix. Let's now go through just input by input and start EQing and adding dynamics. So here's our kick drum, and if we go over to viewing this, there's a really neat thing on the M32, and some of your mixes might have this, where you'll actually have a spectral viewer to see all of the frequency energy across the frequency spectrum. Obviously, being a kick drum, you have a lot of low frequencies that have energy and a little bit of, you know, harmonics up here and the smack of the beater and whatever. So first thing I tend to do when I EQ a kick drum is to go after the fundamental, and just from memory, the fundamental of a kick drum is around 60 to 80 hertz. You can see that reflected right here. So I'll go into the low here and I'll bump that up. Now I'll move that frequency down to where I see that frequency, which is around 60 hertz. And obviously if you bump that up too much, you're probably going to overload and it'll just get a little, way too muddy. But just a little bit of that fundamental would really help us out. The next frequency I'll go for is what I call the boxiness. And like most EQing, you tend to use a fishing technique, where what you do is you boost that way up, narrow it down, and then go after the frequency that kind of sounds obnoxious. And so right about there, around 200 hertz, it's just a little kind of boxy there. And what I can do is just widen that out a little bit and then just take out, not a lot, maybe a couple of dB right there. And then the next one I would go after is the smack of that beta. And the great thing about emphasizing the smack of a beta is that you can, and it's normally around 2K, is that you can really emphasize and make that kick drum stand out of the mix without having to bump it, way up here. If you just need it to just just the attack of that comes through the mix, normally around 2K is a good one here. So let's have a listen to that without EQ, and then with EQ. Okay, moving on to our snare drum. What's one thing that you notice with the snare drum immediately? Not a lot of low energy there. So we could either use that with the EQ here, or we could use our low cut or a high pass filter here, and then you can move that along. If you move it up too much, the snare drum will start getting thin. We don't want that. We want to bring it down about here. And the first thing I want to do is just bring up some of that kind of the tubbiness of that snare, or the body of that snare, and that's normally around 200 hertz. So I'll go low frequency here and bump that up. You can see I'm missing it, so I'll just move it along there. And then now I'll go after some of the boxes of that snare drum. We'll do the same thing here, move it along. Let me wait till it goes from the side stick to the snare. Yeah, it's probably right about there. If I just pull out just a little bit of that and then add a little bit of top end kind of sizzle. So now let's listen to that before and after. That's without EQ. Add just a little bit more top end to that and widen that up a bit. Okay, so here's our hi-hat. What's the first thing you would note about hi-hat? Look at all the energy up there. There's not a lot going down there, so we would definitely want to employ our low cut, and we can be pretty severe here, going all the way up, if you like. There's a little bit of energy down here, but I tend to kind of pull that out a little bit. Around 600 hertz, there's kind of like the clank of that. I'd kind of pull it out a little bit there, and then go after maybe around 3K, and then maybe even a little bit higher. So let's listen to that without, and now with. Much better. Okay, so here's our high tom. I've got this looped around so we can hear that. If you're in a sound check, just have your drummer just do single hits on that. So first thing I do, look at the high cut. Not too much, right? boy, it helps to have this visually up here. Okay, so the first thing I do is probably add a little bit of low energy there, like right around that fundamental. Pull out a little bit of boxiness around maybe 300. Add a little bit of bite off of that stick noise. Might even add a little bit of top end here if we went to the shelf. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So then, because these toms are fairly similar, you could do some cheats here where we could copy them across to each of them. Let me do that off camera and I'll come back. Now obviously as I go to a lower tom, you want to add some of that low cut, but you wouldn't want to mirror what the high tom was. Remember the high tom was right there, so on the next one you'd want to go a little bit lower on that, and then the third one a little bit lower than that, and the floor tom you may not even want to do that at all, or maybe we could sneak in just a little tiny bit there. And then you might want to adjust your fundamentals and also your cutting of your boxiness as you go across. But for the moment, I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, let's look at our ride.